Hey everybody, I'm Jay Friesen and this is Dr. Brian Mattson. We're here with Dead Reckoning TV and we've been looking at food the entire month of February. And I'm particularly excited about this topic. We've been looking at how some of our preferences and some of our desires come from our heart. And it's not actually what comes into us, but it's what comes out of us. And on a much deeper level, idols and idolatry. It's not an old school concept, is it?
Well, it certainly sounds like an old school concept. Sounds like the sort of thing that you might find if you were to dust off the old family King James version of the Bible. You open it up and you're reading all about idolatry and fashioning golden calves and being judged for it and that sort of thing. And so in that sense, it can seem really remote from us. But you know, just to understand a little bit about where the Israelites are coming from with all of this idolatry stuff, you have to remember that this is an agrarian people. They rely on their crops to grow just to survive, just to live. And you might live in Palestine and be a practicing Jew and you might worship Yahweh, but you know, it might not hurt to hedge your bets just a little bit and make a little figurine of the local Canaanite rain god, you know? It's sort of like your insurance policy. If Yahweh doesn't come through for you, you know, maybe the rain god will. So there's the issue of lack of trust, lack of belief. God's not going to take care of me. I better do it myself. So it can seem very, very remote, but in reality, it's not remote at all because we do it too. We fashion all kinds of things that we worship, that we revere, that we adore, that we bow down to. You know, Paul tells us in Romans chapter 1 that the very essence of humanity's sin against God is that we worship and serve created things instead of our Creator. We find all kinds of things to worship except the God who made and fashioned us. You know, the great theologian John Calvin, which is a name that maybe many of our viewers might be familiar with, and of course, you know, the hair on the back of their neck might, you know, prickle up because, you know, he doesn't have that great of a reputation. They have these visions of a stern, austere, judgmental theologian. He wasn't any of those things, by the way, but give him a little credit. There are very few people about whom people are talking 500 years after they've died. So John Calvin was doing something right. John Calvin described the human heart as an idol factory. That we're constantly manufacturing out of our hearts things to worship and serve. This is, of course, going right back to what we've seen all this month with Jesus' teaching about food. It's not the stuff. It's not what's out there. It's not what God created. The defilement comes from within. And Calvin very perceptively says the defilement is coming because we are idol factories. Our hearts are manufacturing things to worship. So while we might not have figurines and golden calves and things that we bow down to, we have all sorts of things we bow down to. A great career, material prosperity, material possessions. It can be sex and drugs and rock and roll or whatever it is. These are all things that we can worship and revere and adore and bow down to instead of God. You know, the Apostle James writes in his letter to the churches in chapter 4 that what causes conflict and fights and divisions among people are the desires waging war within us. And you know, we saw this when we were talking about preferences and laws. What can happen is you can have a perfectly good desire for something, and then as it starts to elevate itself beyond just a desire, it starts to become a demand. And when it becomes a demand, then suddenly we're in the level of idolatry, because when it's a demand, we're asking people to sacrifice for this precious thing that we have. Like Gollum, we caress our ring and we say, my precious, whatever it is. And when people start getting in the way of our precious, we start sacrificing them. And James says that at the end of the day, the end of that road is we can end up murdering people who get in our way. Now, when we start down this, when a preference becomes a law, when a desire becomes a demand, we are now in the realm of idolatry. We are worshiping and serving a created thing instead of God. So here's a good maxim. Here's a good maxim for life. It's interesting that when James talks about our desires, he doesn't say that what causes fights and wars are our bad desires, things that we shouldn't be desiring. He says, no, it's just our desires. They can be perfectly good desires. So here's the thing to remember. Good goods, perfectly legitimate good things, like a good job, material prosperity, might be a material possession. A perfectly good thing makes a really bad God. We can't make good goods bad gods. When we do that, we will not end up loving our neighbor. We will end up hating our neighbor, that person who gets in the way of what we really want. So idolatry may sound like an old school concept, but it is very relevant to us in our lives every single day.
Fascinating. Fascinating and fantastic all at the same time. This wraps our discussion on food and worldview, but we're going to continue with the whole worldview theme next week. You may have heard the crass military term foobar. Well, we're going to be looking at how the world is foo, but not bar. Looking forward to that conversation. I'm Jay Friesen. This is Dr. Brian Mattson. You've been watching Dead Reckoning TV. Please subscribe to us. Share us with your friends and send us an email if you'd like us to answer a question or look at a topic you're curious about what Christianity has to say. Thanks so much, and we'll see you guys next week.